The desert air shimmered with heat as Lieutenant Colonel Alexandra Viper Kowalski adjusted her flight helmet one final time. The Marines around her snickered, their voices carrying across the tarmac like vultures circling carrion. She'd heard it all before. The whispered jokes about her limp, the speculation about how she'd really gotten those scars that spiderwebbed across her left temple and disappeared beneath her collar. 3 tour in Afghanistan, 2 Purple Hearts, and a distinguished flying cross apparently meant nothing when you walked with a slight favor to your right leg, and bore the permanent reminders of a helicopter that had kissed the ground too hard in Helmand Province. "Look at Frankenstein's monster trying to get back in the cockpit," muttered Corporal Davies, loud enough for half the squadron to hear. His buddies erupted in muffled laughter, the sound bitter against the morning air. Viper didn't turn around. She'd learned long ago that acknowledgement only fed the beast. Instead, she focused on the sleek silhouette of her F-35B Lightning II, its stealth geometry cutting sharp angles against the azure sky. The aircraft sat ready, weapons systems hot, fuel tanks topped off. Intelligence had been sketchy, something about a high-value target in the northern mountains, radio chatter suggesting enemy movement. Standard reconnaissance, they'd called it. Standard. But Viper knew better than to trust the word standard in this business. 22 years of military service had taught her that standard was the calm before the storm, the held breath before the scream. Her fingers traced the raised scar tissue along her collarbone, a nervous habit she'd developed after the accident. The explosion that had nearly killed her had also taken her co-pilot, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, a young woman with 3 kids and a laugh that could light up a ready room. The guilt never left, no matter how many successful missions followed, no matter how many times the shrinks told her it wasn't her fault. The mockery behind her continued, but something had changed in the air. The laughter died abruptly, replaced by the sharp snap of boots coming to attention. Viper turned slowly, her pilot's instincts already reading the shift in atmosphere. General Patricia Hawthorne stood at the edge of the tarmac, her silver stars gleaming in the harsh desert sun. The old woman's face was granite, her gray eyes scanning the assembled Marines with the precision of a targeting system. She'd built her reputation in the sandbox of Iraq and the mountains of Afghanistan, a warrior's warrior who'd never asked her people to go anywhere she wouldn't lead. When General Hawthorne went silent, smart people listened. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of jet fuel and possibility. Viper straightened her shoulders, feeling the familiar weight of her flight suit, the comfortable press of her sidearm against her hip. Whatever was coming, she was ready. She'd been ready for 22 years, through every broken bone, every sleepless night, every whispered doubt about whether a woman, especially a damaged one, belonged in the cockpit of America's most advanced fighter jet. General Hawthorne's boots clicked against the concrete as she approached, each step deliberate, measured. The Marines who'd been laughing moments before now stood frozen, their faces pale beneath their desert tans. They'd made a mistake, Viper realized. They'd underestimated not just her, but the general's capacity for judgment. In the military, respect flowed uphill and downhill simultaneously, and right now, the current was about to change direction with devastating force. The general stopped 3 feet from Viper, her weathered hands clasped behind her back. For a moment, the only sound was the distant whine of turbine engines and the whisper of wind across the airfield. Then, slowly, General Hawthorne reached out and touched the scar that traced Viper's temple, her calloused fingertips gentle against the damaged skin. The gesture was intimate, unexpectedly tender, and it sent a ripple of shock through the watching Marines. "Tell me about this one," the general said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. It wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in curiosity, an invitation to bear witness to something the jeering voices had never bothered to understand. Viper felt her throat tighten, memories threatening to surface like bodies from a lake. She'd never told the full story, not to the investigators, not to the doctors, certainly not to the Marines who found such entertainment in her visible wounds. "Helmand Province, 2019, she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. We were extracting a wounded SEAL team, taking heavy fire from a reinforced Taliban position. My co-pilot took shrapnel through the neck during our approach. Birds started coming apart around us, hydraulics failing, tail rotor compromised. She paused, watching the general's face for any sign of judgment or dismissal. Instead, she saw only attention, the focused intensity of a career soldier who understood the weight of war stories. The bird went down hard, Viper continued. Maria died on impact. I woke up 3 days later in a field hospital with half my face held together by surgical wire and titanium plates. The SEALs made it out alive. She didn't mention the months of physical therapy, the nightmares that still woke her in cold sweats, the way her left hand sometimes shook when she thought too hard about the sound Maria's breath had made, wet and rattling in those final seconds before impact. General Hawthorne nodded slowly, her fingers still tracing the scar's raised edges. "And this one?" she asked, gesturing toward Viper's collar, where another pale line disappeared beneath the fabric of her flight suit. The Marines behind them had gone completely silent now, their earlier bravado evaporated in the face of something larger than their small cruelties. They were witnessing something sacred, Viper realized. The communion between warriors who'd bled for the same flag, fought in the same wars, carried the same ghosts. "IED outside Bagram," Viper replied, unbuttoning her collar to reveal the full extent of the scarring. The tissue damage extended down her shoulder and across her collarbone, a map of violence etched in flesh. 2017. We were providing close air support for a convoy that got hit. I took my bird in too low, too fast, caught a rocket-propelled grenade in the engine compartment and rode the wreckage down into a minefield. She paused, seeing again the orange flash of the explosion, feeling again the searing heat that had turned her flight suit into molten plastic against her skin. The desert wind shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of reveille from the main base. General Hawthorne's hand moved from the scar to Viper's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that spoke louder than any medal ceremony or commendation letter. "How many?" the general asked, and Viper understood immediately what she meant. How many times had she cheated death? How many times had she climbed back into a cockpit after the universe had tried to kill her? 17 combat missions after Bagram, Viper answered. 12 after Helmand. The numbers felt strange on her tongue, clinical and clean in a way that belied the terror and determination each one represented. Every mission had been a choice, a conscious decision to climb back into the sky despite the scars, despite the fear, despite the voices that whispered she should retire to a desk job and let younger, unbroken pilots take the risks. General Hawthorne smiled then, a fierce expression that transformed her weathered features into something almost predatory. "Outstanding," she said, loud enough for every Marine on the tarmac to hear. "That's what we call a warrior." She turned to face the assembled troops, her voice carrying the authority of 4 decades in uniform. "You boys want to know what courage looks like. It's not the absence of fear. It's climbing back into the cockpit after the sky has tried to kill you 17 times. It's wearing your scars like medals, because they remind you what you've survived." Corporal Davies, who'd been so quick with his jokes earlier, now stared at his boots, his face burning with shame. The other Marines shuffled uncomfortably, beginning to understand the magnitude of their error. They'd been mocking a legend without realizing it, a pilot whose record would make seasoned veterans weep with envy. Viper felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of tension she'd carried for years. Recognition had always mattered less than mission accomplishment, but standing here with General Hawthorne's hand on her shoulder, she finally understood that she'd earned something more valuable than approval. The general turned back to Viper, her gray eyes serious. "What's your call sign mean, Colonel?" she asked. "Why Viper?" It was another test, Viper realized, another opportunity to prove herself worthy of the respect that was slowly building around them like morning mist. She'd been asked the question before, but never by someone who would understand the full weight of the answer. "Because I strike without warning," Viper replied, "and my bite is always fatal." The words came out harder than she'd intended, edged with the kind of confidence that only came from surviving the unsurvivable. It wasn't boastfulness. It was simple fact, carved in enemy wreckage across 3 theaters of war. She'd earned her reputation one missile at a time, one perfect shot after another, until enemy pilots spoke her call sign in hushed, fearful tones. General Hawthorne laughed, a sound like breaking glass and victory bells. "I've read your file, Viper. 37 confirmed kills, 0 friendly fire incidents, and a mission success rate that makes other pilots weep. You know what the enemy calls you?" She paused, letting the question hang in the desert air like heat shimmer. "The ghost of the Hindu Kush. They think you're already dead, that you can't be killed because you've already been through hell and come out the other side." The revelation hit Viper like a physical blow. She'd known her reputation had preceded her in certain circles, but hearing it spoken aloud by a general officer gave it weight, substance, reality. She was more than just a scarred pilot trying to prove herself. She was a myth made flesh, a story enemy combatants told their children to keep them afraid of American air power. The knowledge was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. "Tell me about today's mission," General Hawthorne continued, her tone shifting to business. "What's the intelligence picture?" She pulled a tablet from her jacket pocket, its screen displaying satellite imagery of mountainous terrain. Red markers indicated known enemy positions, while blue ones showed friendly forces. It looked like a chess board arranged by someone with a taste for violence and complexity. Viper accepted the tablet, her pilot's eyes automatically analyzing the terrain and threat indicators. "High-value target in the northern sector," she reported. "Intelligence suggests a meeting of regional Taliban commanders, possibly including external financing sources. The window is narrow, 6 hours maximum before they disperse back to their individual areas of operation." She zoomed in on the target area, noting the natural defensive positions and limited approach vectors. "It's a trap," General Hawthorne said quietly, voicing what Viper had already suspected. "The intelligence is too clean, too convenient. Someone wants us to send aircraft into that valley." She pointed to the narrow gorge that provided the only reasonable attack route. "Notice how perfectly positioned those anti-aircraft batteries are, how the escape routes all funnel through kill zones." Viper nodded, her tactical mind already working through the implications. "They're using the HVT as bait. They want to down an American aircraft, preferably with pilot capture for propaganda purposes." The realization should have been terrifying, but instead, Viper felt the familiar calm that always settled over her when the stakes became clear. This wasn't just another reconnaissance mission. It was a chance to turn the hunters into the hunted. "Exactly," the general confirmed. "Which is why I'm sending you." The statement hung between them like a bridge across an abyss. "Not because you're expendable, but because you're the only pilot I trust to see the trap coming and turn it inside out. You've been dancing with death for 22 years, Viper. Time to show these bastards what a real ghost can do." The challenge was implicit, beautiful in its simplicity. They wanted to kill her. Let them try. She'd been dying by degrees ever since Helmand, ever since Maria's blood had painted the cockpit windows red and her own mortality had become a tangible thing. But death, she discovered, was just another enemy to outmaneuver, another target to defeat with superior tactics and unbreakable will. Behind them, the Marines watched in stunned silence as their understanding of the woman they'd mocked underwent a fundamental revision. This wasn't some broken pilot trying to relive past glory. This was a weapon in human form, a guided missile wrapped in scarred flesh and titanium resolve. The jokes died in their throats, replaced by something approaching awe. General Hawthorne handed Viper a sealed packet marked with classification stamps and warning labels. "Your real mission parameters," she explained. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this tarmac." She waited for Viper's nod before continuing. "We know it's a trap because we set it. The Taliban commanders are real, the meeting is real, but we've been feeding them intelligence designed to draw them into that valley at exactly the time we want them there." The elegance of the operation began to unfold in Viper's mind like a deadly flower. "Counterambush," she breathed, understanding flooding through her. We're the ones setting the trap. They think they're baiting us into a kill zone, but we're actually herding them into one. It was beautiful in its complexity, layers within layers of deception and misdirection. The anti-aircraft batteries are obsolete Soviet-era systems, General Hawthorne continued. Dangerous to older aircraft, but your Lightning can dance around them all day. What the Taliban doesn't know is that we've been tracking their communications for weeks. Every move they make, every defensive position they establish, it's all part of a script we wrote for them. Her smile was predatory, the expression of a hunter who'd spent months preparing the perfect shot. Viper felt her pulse quicken, not with fear but with anticipation. This was the kind of mission that defined careers, the kind of operation that would be studied in war colleges for decades. Rules of engagement, she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Missions like this didn't come with restrictive guidelines or political considerations. Weapons free, the general replied. Full combat authorization. If it's in that valley and it's not broadcasting an American IFF signal, it's a legitimate target. She paused, her weathered hands gripping Viper's shoulders with surprising strength. But I need you to understand something, Colonel. This mission isn't about body counts or strategic objectives. It's about sending a message. Every enemy pilot who hears about what happens in that valley needs to know that America has angels of death who can't be killed, because they've already been through hell. The weight of expectation settled over Viper like armor, comfortable and familiar. She'd carried similar loads before. The hopes of ground troops who needed air support, the trust of commanders who'd bet their careers on her skills, the unspoken prayers of families who'd never know how close they'd come to losing their sons and daughters. This felt different, though. This felt like legacy. I understand, General, she replied, her voice steady despite the storm building in her chest. When do I launch? The question was purely professional, but underneath it ran currents of something deeper. Excitement, vindication, the fierce joy of a weapon finally being used for its intended purpose. General Hawthorne glanced at her watch, a battered piece of military hardware that had probably seen more combat zones than most soldiers. Wheels up in 30 minutes. You'll have full satellite coverage and real-time intelligence updates. AWACS will provide battlefield management, but once you're in the valley, you're on your own. She stepped back, her posture shifting subtly from mentor to commanding officer. Any questions? Viper shook her head, her mind already shifting into mission mode. The human concerns, fear, doubt, the lingering ache of old wounds, began to fade, replaced by the crystalline focus that had kept her alive through 17 impossible situations. She was no longer Alexandra Kowalski, damaged veteran with a limp and scars. She was Viper, the ghost of the Hindu Kush, and she had work to do. The Marines who had mocked her earlier now stood at rigid attention, their faces masks of professional respect. Word traveled fast in military circles, and by now, everyone on the base knew they'd been in the presence of something exceptional. Corporal Davies stepped forward, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that looked almost like reverence. "Colonel," he said quietly, we wanted to apologize. We didn't know." Viper studied his face for a moment, seeing genuine remorse alongside the fear that came from realizing you'd insulted a legend to her face. "You're Marines," she replied simply. "Act like it. Honor, courage, commitment. Remember those words the next time you're tempted to mock someone's scars." She turned away from him, dismissing his shame as irrelevant to her current purpose. There were bigger battles to fight than the small cruelties of small men. General Hawthorne watched the exchange with approval. 30 minutes, Colonel," she repeated. "Make them count." She walked away, her boots clicking against the concrete in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Behind her, the Marines began to disperse, their voices hushed as they processed what they'd witnessed. The tarmac felt different now, charged with potential energy like the moment before lightning strikes. Viper remained alone with her aircraft, running through pre-flight checks with the methodical precision that had become second nature. Her hands moved across controls and switches, without conscious thought, muscle memory, guiding her through systems checks while her mind focused on the mission ahead. The F-35B responded to her touch like a thoroughbred recognizing its rider. Sensors coming online, weapons systems initializing, the sophisticated fusion of technology and human will that made modern air warfare possible. As she worked, she felt the familiar transformation beginning, the shift from human to pilot, from individual to weapon system. Her scars stopped aching, her limp disappeared into the grace of purpose, and her damaged heart began to beat with the steady rhythm of a machine built for war. In 30 minutes, she would take to the sky and prove that some angels were forged in fire, tempered by loss, and made invincible by the simple refusal to surrender. The desert wind whispered across the airfield, carrying with it the promise of violence and vindication. Somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, enemy fighters were preparing their trap, confident in their ability to bring down an American pilot. They had no idea what was coming for them. They had no idea that legends, once awakened, were impossible to kill. 28 minutes and counting. Viper smiled, the expression sharp as a blade's edge. It was going to be a beautiful day for flying. The pre-flight checklist complete, Viper climbed into the cockpit of her Lightning II with the fluid grace of someone who'd performed the same action thousands of times. The familiar embrace of the pilot's seat, the comforting weight of her helmet, the gentle hum of avionics systems spinning up, all of it combined to create a sense of homecoming that no earthbound location had ever provided. This was where she belonged, suspended between earth and heaven, armed with precision weapons and guided by skills honed in the crucible of combat. Her fingers danced across the touchscreen displays, bringing weapon systems online with practiced efficiency. 2 AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles for air-to-air engagement, 4 GBU-12 Paveway laser-guided bombs for ground targets, and the GAU-22A cannon loaded with 182 rounds of 25 ammunition. It was enough firepower to level a small city, all of it controlled by a woman whose enemies had already written off as a ghost. The irony wasn't lost on her. They'd created their own doom by underestimating what a dead woman could accomplish. "Tower, this is Viper 1 requesting clearance for departure," she spoke into her comm system, her voice crisp and professional. The tower's response came immediately, the controller's tone carrying the kind of deference usually reserved for visiting dignitaries or Medal of Honor recipients. Word had spread fast about General Hawthorne's public endorsement, and now everyone wanted to be part of the legend being written in real time. "Viper 1, you are cleared for immediate departure. Godspeed, Colonel." The controller's voice cracked slightly on the last word, emotion bleeding through professional composure. Viper felt a moment of unexpected warmth. These people, these strangers, were sending her off to war with their prayers and hopes invested in her success. It was a responsibility she'd never taken lightly, the trust of those who would never know the full cost of victory. The Lightning's engine spooled up with a sound like controlled thunder, 40,000 pounds of thrust straining against the aircraft's brakes. Viper ran through her final checks, verifying that every system was green, every weapon was armed, every possible failure mode had been addressed. In combat aviation, paranoia wasn't a character flaw. It was a survival skill that kept you alive when Murphy's Law decided to make an appearance at the worst possible moment. "Viper 1 rolling," she announced, releasing the brakes and feeling the familiar surge of acceleration that pressed her back into her seat. The Lightning gathered speed down the runway, its sophisticated computers managing the complex balance of thrust, lift, and control inputs that made flight possible. At 150 knots, she pulled back on the stick and felt the earth fall away beneath her, gravity exchanged for the infinite freedom of the sky. Climbing through 10,000 feet, Viper felt the last vestiges of human frailty fall away. Up here, her scars didn't matter, her limp was irrelevant, and the nightmares that haunted her sleep became fuel for the cold fury that made her such an effective killer. She was no longer a woman pretending to be whole. She was a predator in her natural element, hunting prey that had made the fatal mistake of challenging American air power. Viper 1, this is Overlord, came the voice of the AWACS controller, calm and professional despite the high-stakes nature of the mission. We have you on scope, climbing through Angels 15. Your target area is bearing 045 degrees, range 112 miles. Current threat assessment shows multiple SAM sites active, but nothing that should trouble your aircraft. Viper acknowledged the transmission while studying the tactical display that painted enemy positions in ominous red symbols across her helmet-mounted sight. The trap was elegant in its simplicity, a narrow valley surrounded by steep ridges, with anti-aircraft weapons positioned to create interlocking fields of fire. Any conventional attack would require flying directly through their engagement envelope, presenting an easy target for weapons systems designed specifically to kill American aircraft. But the F-35B Lightning II wasn't conventional, and neither was its pilot. Viper began planning her approach, using the terrain and her aircraft's stealth characteristics to her advantage. She would come in high and fast, using the Lightning's advanced sensors to identify and prioritize targets before they knew she was there. By the time the enemy realized they were under attack, half their defensive positions would already be smoking craters. Overlord Viper 1, requesting permission to go tactical, she transmitted, asking for authorization to switch to combat frequency and begin her attack run. The response came immediately, tinged with what sounded almost like excitement. Everyone monitoring this mission knew they were witnessing something special, a master craftsman demonstrating why she'd earned her fearsome reputation. Viper 1, you are cleared tactical. Paint the sky red, Colonel. The AWACS controller's voice carried the weight of institutional authority, the blessing of the United States Air Force being bestowed on its most lethal daughter. Viper felt a moment of fierce pride, not in herself, but in the service that had shaped her, the institution that had given her purpose when her own world had crumbled around her. She switched to the tactical frequency and immediately heard the controlled chaos of a modern battlefield. Pilots checking in with ground controllers, forward air controllers calling for close air support, the electronic warfare specialists jamming enemy communications. It was the sound of America at war, and she was about to add her own voice to the deadly chorus. Viper 1, on station and ready to prosecute targets, she announced, her words clipped and professional. Below her, the mountains of Afghanistan stretched out like wrinkled brown paper, their peaks crowned with snow that looked deceptively peaceful from 25,000 feet. Somewhere in those valleys, enemy fighters were preparing to die, though they didn't know it yet. They thought they were hunters setting an ambush. They had no idea they were prey in a trap 20 years in the making. The Lightning sensors painted the target area in exquisite detail, each enemy position highlighted in red on her tactical display. Viper counted 14 separate threats, SAM sites, machine gun nests, mortar positions, and what looked like a command bunker built into the side of a cliff. It was a formidable defensive network, the kind that would have given pause to even experienced pilots flying older aircraft. To Viper, in her state-of-the-art stealth fighter, it looked like a target-rich environment. Beginning attack run, she transmitted, pushing the Lightning into a shallow dive that would bring her into optimal firing position. Her heartbeat remained steady, her breathing controlled, her hands rock solid on the controls. This was what she'd been born to do, what she'd survived 17 other impossible missions to accomplish. The scars on her body were proof of her qualifications, testimonials written in flesh and blood by an enemy that had tried and failed to kill her. The first SAM site died without ever knowing what hit it. Viper's GBU-12 struck the radar antenna with surgical precision, the explosion sending a column of black smoke into the crystal-clear sky. Before the debris had finished falling, she was already lining up her second target, the Lightning's advanced fire control system calculating range, windage, and target motion with inhuman precision. This was modern warfare at its most elegant, death delivered with mathematical certainty by a pilot who had transcended the merely human. "Target destroyed, continuing attack," she reported, her voice betraying no emotion despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Each successful strike was vindication, proof that the Marines' mockery had been based on ignorance rather than insight. She wasn't a broken pilot trying to recapture past glory. She was America's answer to the question of what happened when you pushed a warrior past her breaking point and discovered she was unbreakable. The enemy's response was swift but uncoordinated, surface-to-air missiles streaking skyward in desperate attempts to bring down an aircraft they couldn't effectively target. Viper watched their contrails with professional detachment, making minor course corrections to avoid the engagement envelopes while maintaining her attack profile. The Lightning stealth technology made her effectively invisible to their guidance systems, a phantom that killed with impunity and vanished before retaliation was possible. By the time she finished her first pass through the valley, 6 enemy positions had been reduced to smoking ruins. The carefully planned ambush was collapsing into chaos, fighters abandoning their positions as they realized their trap had become their tomb. But Viper wasn't finished. Not yet. General Hawthorne had sent her here to deliver a message, and messages required a certain theatrical flair to be properly understood. Overlord Viper 1. Primary objectives neutralized, but I've still got ordnance remaining. Requesting permission to conduct battle damage assessment and engage targets of opportunity. The request was perfectly professional, but underneath it ran currents of something darker, the predator's instinct to ensure her prey was truly dead. Roger, Viper 1. You are cleared to continue engagement. Make it count. The AWACS controller's approval came with what sounded almost like satisfaction. Everyone monitoring this mission understood its broader implications. This wasn't just about eliminating enemy fighters. It was about demonstrating American resolve, showing potential adversaries what happened when they targeted U.S. personnel. Viper banked the Lightning into a tight turn, her enhanced vision system scanning the valley floor for signs of remaining resistance. What she saw brought a cold smile to her lips. The enemy fighters were streaming out of their positions in full retreat, abandoning equipment and wounded comrades in their haste to escape the invisible death that had suddenly appeared among them. It was a rout, pure and simple, the kind of decisive victory that would echo through enemy ranks for years to come. But retreat wasn't the same as escape, and Viper had 17 years of pent-up fury to work through. Her cannon came online with a subtle vibration that she felt through the aircraft's frame, 25 rounds feeding into the firing chamber like prayers into a deadly rosary. The fleeing fighters looked so small from her altitude, tiny figures running across the landscape like ants fleeing a broken nest. They'd wanted to kill an American pilot today. Instead, they were about to discover why some angels were forged in hellfire. The cannon's roar was beautiful in its brevity, short controlled bursts that sent high-explosive rounds racing toward targets that couldn't run fast enough to escape their fate. Each muzzle flash was punctuation in a sentence that began with mockery and ended with legend. Each impact a period that closed another chapter in the ongoing war between civilization and those who would destroy it. When the ammunition counter reached 0, Viper pulled the Lightning into a climbing turn that would take her away from the valley and back toward friendly airspace. Behind her, smoke rose from a dozen separate fires, black columns that would be visible for miles in the clear mountain air. The message General Hawthorne had wanted delivered was written in flame and destruction across the landscape. America remembers its own, and retribution comes on stealth wings guided by scarred hands that refuse to surrender. Viper 1, departing target area, she transmitted, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a job well done. All primary and secondary objectives neutralized. Battle damage assessment indicates complete mission success. The professional language couldn't quite contain the fierce joy that burned in her chest, the vindication that came from proving her worth in the most fundamental way possible. As the Lightning climbed toward the safety of high altitude, Viper allowed herself a moment of reflection. The Marines who'd mocked her scars would hear about this mission within hours. how their broken pilot had single-handedly dismantled an enemy stronghold, how the woman they derided as Frankenstein's monster had proven herself to be something far more dangerous. They'd learned that scars weren't signs of weakness but evidence of survival, proof that some warriors were forged in crucibles that would destroy lesser souls. The flight back to base passed in contemplative silence, the Lightning's autopilot handling the routine navigation while Viper processed the emotional weight of what she'd accomplished. This hadn't been her first solo mission or her most challenging tactical problem, but it felt different somehow, more significant, more final. She'd been carrying the weight of others' doubts for years, using their disbelief as motivation to exceed every expectation and surpass every standard. Today, that burden had finally been lifted. General Hawthorne's voice crackled through her headset as she approached the airfield, the older woman's tone carrying unmistakable pride. "Outstanding work, Viper. You've given us exactly what we needed, a reminder that American air power is still something to be feared." There was more in those words than simple congratulations. There was recognition, validation, the acknowledgement between warriors that transcended rank and protocol. "Thank you, General," Viper replied, meaning it more than she'd meant anything in years. It was an honor to serve. The words were formal, but they carried the weight of genuine gratitude, not just for this mission, but for the opportunity to prove that broken things could still be deadly, that scarred warriors might actually be the most dangerous of all. The Lightning touched down with barely a bump, Viper's hands guiding the aircraft through landing procedures she could have performed in her sleep. As she taxied toward the hardstand where ground crew waited to service her aircraft, she could see the assembled Marines standing at attention. Word had already reached them about the mission's success, about the complete destruction of the enemy stronghold that intelligence had been tracking for months. They understood now what they'd been mocking, not a damaged pilot trying to relive past glory, but a legend still being written in blood and fire. General Hawthorne waited on the tarmac, her weathered face creased with something that might have been pride or satisfaction or simple recognition that justice had been served. Behind her stood Corporal Davies and the other Marines who'd found such entertainment in Viper's scars, their faces carefully neutral but their postures radiating the kind of respect that couldn't be faked or forced. They'd learned today that appearances could be deceiving, that the most dangerous weapons were often the ones that looked broken. As Viper climbed down from her cockpit, she felt the familiar weight of gravity reasserting itself, bringing with it the return of human limitations, the slight limp, the aching scars, the thousand small reminders of her mortality. But something fundamental had changed during her flight. The mockery that had followed her for months, the whispered doubts about her fitness for combat duty, the questioning glances that asked whether a damaged pilot could still be trusted with America's most advanced aircraft. All of that had been burned away in the fires of her success. "Mission accomplished," she reported to General Hawthorne, her voice steady and professional despite the emotions churning in her chest. "All objectives neutralized, no friendly casualties, aircraft status green across the board." It was the kind of clean, decisive victory that would be studied in tactical courses for decades, the textbook example of how to turn an enemy ambush into their funeral. General Hawthorne nodded, her gray eyes reflecting something that looked like maternal pride. "Exceptional work, Colonel. You've reminded everyone here why call signs are earned, not given." She turned to address the assembled Marines, her voice carrying across the tarmac with the authority of 4 decades in uniform. "Gentlemen, you've just witnessed what 22 years of military service looks like when it's guided by honor, courage, and unbreakable commitment. Study this moment, because you're looking at the standard you should aspire to meet." The Marines snapped to attention with a precision that spoke of genuine respect rather than mere protocol. Corporal Davies stepped forward, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that looked almost like shame mixed with awe. "Colonel," he said carefully, "we owe you an apology. We were wrong to mock what we didn't understand. Your scars, they're not signs of weakness, they're proof of strength." Viper studied his face for a moment, seeing genuine remorse alongside the dawning understanding that he'd insulted a warrior whose reputation would outlive them all. "Apology accepted, Corporal," she replied quietly. "But remember this lesson. In the military, we don't judge a weapon by its appearance, we judge it by its effectiveness. The same principle applies to warriors." As the crowd began to disperse, General Hawthorne placed a hand on Viper's shoulder, the gesture conveying more than words ever could. "Walk with me," she said simply, and together they moved away from the aircraft toward the relative privacy of the operations building. The desert sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Viper of tracer fire and burning wreckage, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. "That mission was about more than eliminating enemy targets," the general said once they were alone. "It was about proving something to yourself, and to everyone who's ever doubted whether a scarred warrior could still be trusted to fight America's battles." She paused at the entrance to the operations building, her weathered hands clasped behind her back. "You've been carrying the weight of other people's expectations for too long, Viper. Today, you finally put that burden down." The words hit deeper than Viper had expected, touching something raw and unhealed that she'd buried beneath layers of professional competence and carefully maintained composure. For years, she'd been fighting two wars simultaneously, one against America's enemies, and another against the whispered doubts that followed her through every ready room, every briefing, every moment when her limp became noticeable or her scars caught the light. Today, she'd finally won both. "I felt it up there," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "The moment when everything clicked into place. Not just the mission, but everything. Like I finally remembered who I was supposed to be." It was the closest she'd come to admitting how lost she'd felt since Helmand, how the constant questioning of her abilities had eaten away at her confidence like acid on metal. General Hawthorne smiled, the expression transforming her stern features into something almost maternal. "That's what happens when you stop fighting yourself and start fighting for yourself. You've spent so much energy trying to prove you're still the pilot you were before the accidents that you forgot you're actually better than you ever were. Pain has a way of refining people, Colonel. It burns away everything that isn't essential, leaving only what matters most." They entered the operations building together, their boots echoing in the corridor that led to the debriefing rooms. Along the walls hung photographs of previous missions, squadron patches from units that had served with distinction, and the eternal memorial wall that bore the names of pilots who'd paid the ultimate price for their service. Viper paused before one particular photograph, a group shot of her old squadron from 2019, taken just weeks before the mission that had changed everything. Maria Santos smiled back at her from the picture, young and vital, and unaware that she had less than a month to live. The guilt that had haunted Viper for years stirred in her chest, but for the first time, it felt different, less like a weight and more like a responsibility. Maria had died believing in the mission, trusting in her pilot's skills to bring them all home. Today, Viper had finally honored that trust by proving that survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about continuing to fight for something worth dying for. "She would have been proud," General Hawthorne said quietly, following Viper's gaze to the photograph. "Maria Santos was one of the finest crew chiefs I ever served with. She believed in you completely, right up until the end. Don't dishonor her memory by doubting what she knew to be true." The words were gentle but firm, carrying the weight of someone who'd lost too many good people to the arbitrary cruelties of war. The debriefing room was sparse and functional, equipped with the kind of technology that allowed intelligence analysts to dissect every moment of a mission with surgical precision. Video feeds from the lightning sensors played on multiple screens, showing the systematic destruction of the enemy positions from angles that made the carnage look almost artistic. Viper watched herself work with professional detachment, noting the precision of her targeting, the efficiency of her movements, the way she'd turned a potential disaster into a complete victory. Preliminary battle damage assessment shows 14 confirmed enemy KIA, 7 vehicles destroyed, and complete neutralization of the anti-aircraft network, reported Colonel James Mitchell, the intelligence officer who'd been monitoring the mission from the ground. His voice carried the kind of satisfaction that came from seeing months of planning culminate in perfect execution. More importantly, we intercepted enemy communications indicating widespread panic and confusion. Word of this defeat is already spreading through their networks. Viper nodded, studying the tactical display that showed the broader strategic implications of her mission. The destroyed stronghold had been more than just a collection of fighting positions. It had been a symbol of enemy capability, proof that they could challenge American air power on favorable terms. Its elimination would resonate far beyond the immediate tactical situation, reminding potential adversaries that the United States still possessed weapons that could strike without warning and kill without mercy. "What's our assessment of enemy morale?" General Hawthorne asked, settling into a chair that placed her at the center of the room's information flow. "How are they processing what happened today?" It was the kind of question that separated great commanders from merely competent ones, the understanding that psychological warfare was often more important than purely kinetic effects. Colonel Mitchell pulled up a series of intercepted communications, the enemy's own words providing insight into their state of mind. Initial reports suggest complete demoralization among the surviving fighters. They're describing the attack as supernatural, claiming their defensive positions were destroyed by ghost fire from an invisible enemy. He paused, scrolling through translated transcripts that painted a picture of an enemy force in psychological collapse. "They're calling you Malik Al-Maut," he continued, glancing at Viper with something approaching reverence. "The Angel of Death. According to their communications, they believe you're already dead, that you can't be killed because you've already passed through hell and returned as an instrument of divine vengeance." The translation was clinical, but it couldn't completely strip away the mythic quality of the enemy's perception. Viper felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She'd known her reputation had grown in enemy circles, but hearing it described in their own words gave it a weight she hadn't expected. She wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was a legend, a story that enemy fighters would tell their children to explain why they feared American air power. The transformation was complete, irreversible, and somehow terrifying in its finality. "That's what we wanted," General Hawthorne said with evident satisfaction. "Fear is a force multiplier that costs nothing to deploy and everything to overcome. Every enemy pilot who hears that story will hesitate before engaging American aircraft, will second-guess their tactics, will wonder if they're about to face the Angel of Death." She turned to Viper, her expression serious. "Do you understand what you've become, Colonel? You're not just a weapon anymore. You're a psychological operation unto yourself." The weight of that realization settled over Viper like a mantle of responsibility. She'd spent her career trying to be the best pilot she could be, focusing on technical excellence and tactical proficiency. Now she understood that her role had evolved beyond individual capability. She'd become a symbol, a manifestation of American military power that transcended the merely physical. The scars that had marked her as damaged in the eyes of ignorant Marines were actually her credentials, proof that she'd been tested by fire and emerged stronger. "I understand," she replied, meaning it completely. "The question is, what happens next? How do we maintain this psychological advantage while continuing to develop our tactical capabilities?" It was the kind of strategic thinking that separated career officers from simple warriors, the ability to see beyond immediate victories toward long-term objectives. General Hawthorne smiled, recognizing the shift in Viper's thinking. "Now you're asking the right questions. This mission was just the beginning, not the end. We've created a myth, but myths require maintenance. They need to be fed with fresh victories, new stories, continued proof that the legend is real and growing stronger." She stood, moving to the tactical display that showed the broader regional situation. "Intelligence indicates 3 more enemy strongholds similar to the one you eliminated today," she continued, pointing to red markers scattered across the mountainous terrain. Each one represents a potential expansion of our psychological campaign, another opportunity to reinforce the idea that American air power is unstoppable. But they're also progressively more challenging, better defended, more sophisticated, designed specifically to counter the tactics you use today. Viper studied the enemy positions with the focused intensity of a predator evaluating potential prey. Each stronghold presented unique challenges, different terrain, varied defensive systems, increasingly complex target arrays that would require all of her skills and more. But instead of feeling intimidated, she felt energized. This was what she'd been training for her entire career, the chance to push her abilities to their absolute limits against an enemy that was actively trying to kill her. "When do we begin?" she asked, the question carrying the weight of absolute commitment. There was no doubt in her voice, no hesitation about accepting a mission profile that would have given pause to even the most experienced pilots. She'd found her purpose again, rediscovered the burning core of determination that had carried her through 17 previous impossible situations. "Tomorrow," General Hawthorne replied. "But first, you need to understand something about the broader strategic picture. This isn't just about Afghanistan anymore. Our intelligence networks indicate that enemy forces across 3 theaters are coordinating their efforts specifically to counter American air power. They've been studying our tactics, developing new defensive systems, training their pilots to exploit what they perceive as weaknesses in our approach." The revelation added layers of complexity to what Viper had assumed was a regional conflict. If enemy forces were coordinating across multiple theaters, sharing intelligence and developing countertactics, then every successful mission became part of a larger strategic chess game. Her individual victories were important, but they were also data points that the enemy would analyze and use to develop more effective responses. "They're adapting," she observed, recognizing the pattern from her years of combat experience. "Each engagement teaches them something new about our capabilities, our limitations, our preferred tactics. We're in an evolutionary arms race where the stakes are measured in lives and strategic objectives." It was both exhilarating and sobering, the kind of challenge that separated true warriors from those who were simply good at following established procedures. General Hawthorne nodded approvingly. "Exactly, which is why we need pilots who can adapt faster than the enemy, who can innovate under pressure, who can turn their own damaged histories into tactical advantages." She paused, her gray eyes focusing on Viper with laser intensity. "Your scars aren't just proof of survival, they're evidence of learning, of adaptation, of the kind of evolutionary pressure that creates superior warriors." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door, followed by the entry of a young communications specialist carrying a classified message folder. "Ma'am," he said to General Hawthorne, "priority communication from the Pentagon. Eyes only, immediate attention required." His voice carried the kind of urgency that usually preceded significant changes in mission parameters or strategic objectives. General Hawthorne accepted the folder, her expression becoming unreadable as she scanned the contents. Viper watched her face carefully, looking for tells that might indicate whether the news was positive or negative. After several minutes of silence, the general looked up, her expression mixing surprise with something that looked almost like anticipation. "Colonel Kowalski," she said formally, using Viper's real name for the first time since their conversation began, "you've been requested by name for a special assignment. The Pentagon wants you in Washington for immediate briefing on a classified operation that apparently requires your specific skill set." She paused, studying the message again as if to confirm she'd read it correctly. Viper felt her pulse quicken, though whether from excitement or apprehension she couldn't say. Special assignments from the Pentagon usually meant one of two things. Either she was being rewarded with a prestigious posting, or she was being handed a mission so dangerous that they needed someone with nothing left to lose. Given her reputation and the day's events, she suspected it was the latter. "Any indication of the mission parameters?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral despite the storm of speculation building in her mind. Washington assignments could range from ceremonial duties to the kind of black operations that never appeared in official records, and her recent psychological profile suggested they weren't calling her in to shake hands with politicians. General Hawthorne shook her head, refolding the message with the careful precision of someone handling classified material. The briefing is compartmentalized above my clearance level. What I can tell you is that your flight leaves in 6 hours, and you should pack for an extended deployment. Whatever they have in mind, it's not going to be resolved quickly. Her tone carried the weight of professional concern mixed with personal pride. As the implications sank in, Viper realized that today's mission had been more than just a tactical victory. It had been an audition, a final examination that she'd apparently passed with exceptional marks. The Pentagon didn't request specific pilots by name unless they needed capabilities that couldn't be found through normal channels. Whatever was waiting for her in Washington, it would require everything she'd learned in 22 years of military service. "I'll be ready," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of absolute commitment. She'd spent her entire adult life preparing for moments like this, when the nation called upon its most experienced warriors to undertake missions that would determine the course of future conflicts. The scars that had marked her as damaged were actually her qualifications, proof that she'd been tested by fire and emerged with capabilities that couldn't be taught in flight school. General Hawthorne stood, extending her hand in a gesture that transcended military protocol. "It's been an honor serving with you, Viper. Whatever they have waiting for you in Washington, give them hell. And remember, legends aren't born, they're forged by people who refuse to surrender even when surrender would be reasonable." The handshake was firm, conveying decades of mutual respect between warriors who dedicated their lives to something larger than themselves. As Viper left the debriefing room, she felt the weight of transition settling over her like armor. The pilot who'd been mocked by Marines that morning was gone, replaced by someone who'd rediscovered her purpose through fire and proven her worth in the most fundamental way possible. The scars remained, the limp persisted, but they were no longer signs of damage. They were credentials, evidence of survival and adaptation that marked her as uniquely qualified for whatever challenges lay ahead. The flight to Washington would give her time to process the day's events, to understand how completely her life had changed in the span of a single mission. She'd begun the morning as a damaged pilot trying to prove her worth. She was ending it as a legend being summoned to serve her nation at the highest levels. The transformation was complete, irreversible, and somehow inevitable, as if everything that had happened before had been preparation for whatever was coming next. 6 hours later, Viper boarded the military transport that would carry her toward her next assignment, her gear packed, and her mind focused on the unknown challenges ahead. Behind her, the desert base continued its eternal rhythm of preparation and vigilance, but she was no longer part of that routine. She'd been called to serve at a level where individual missions could alter the course of history, where the stakes were measured not in tactical victories, but in strategic advantages that would shape the world for generations to come. As the transport climbed toward cruising altitude, she gazed out at the star-filled sky that had been her domain for over 2 decades. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new enemies, new opportunities to prove that broken warriors could be the most dangerous of all. The Angel of Death was airborne again, carrying with her the hopes and fears of a nation that had invested everything in the belief that some people were simply too stubborn to die and too skilled to fail. The journey to Washington passed in contemplative silence, the steady drone of the transport's engines providing a rhythm for reflection on how dramatically her circumstances had changed. Just hours earlier, she'd been enduring the casual cruelty of Marines who saw only her visible scars and assumed they understood her limitations. Now she was being summoned to the Pentagon for an assignment that apparently required her specific combination of skills, experience, and psychological resilience. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same wounds that had marked her as damaged goods in the eyes of some had become her most valuable qualifications in the assessment of others. The Pentagon appeared through the aircraft's windows like a massive concrete fortress, its five-sided geometry stark against the Virginia landscape. Viper had been here before, but always for routine briefings or ceremonial functions. This felt different, more urgent, more consequential, charged with the kind of potential energy that preceded seismic shifts in military policy or strategic doctrine. Whatever waited for her inside those walls would require everything she'd learned in 22 years of service and more. The landing was smooth, professional, unremarkable except for the presence of a full-bird colonel waiting on the tarmac with transportation already arranged. No delay, no bureaucratic inefficiency, no time wasted on pleasantries that didn't serve the mission. Viper appreciated the efficiency even as it confirmed her suspicion that whatever had brought her here operated at a level where minutes could matter more than lives. Colonel Kowalski, the waiting officer inquired, though her distinctive scars made identification unnecessary. I'm Colonel Sarah Brennan, Office of Special Operations. If you'll come with me, there are people waiting to speak with you. Her tone was respectful but urgent, carrying the weight of someone who'd been given explicit instructions about timing and discretion. The drive through Washington's corridors of power gave Viper time to study the city that served as the nerve center of American military might. These streets had witnessed the decisions that sent her generation to war, that had shaped the conflicts in which she'd earned her scars and lost her innocence. Now she was being drawn into that decision-making process at a level she'd never imagined possible, transformed from a tactical asset into a strategic resource. The Pentagon's interior was a maze of corridors and security checkpoints, each one representing another layer of compartmentalization, designed to protect America's most sensitive secrets. Viper followed Colonel Brennan through a series of increasingly secure areas, her escorts badge opening doors that required progressively higher clearance levels. Whatever they were approaching existed in the rarefied atmosphere where policy became action and theory transformed into life-or-death reality. The briefing room was smaller than she'd expected, dominated by a conference table surrounded by chairs occupied by officers whose rank insignia represented decades of combined military experience. At the head of the table sat a man whose presence commanded immediate attention, General Marcus Webb, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the most senior uniformed officer in the American military. His weathered face bore the kind of scars that came from leading from the front, and his gray eyes carried the weight of decisions that had shaped global conflicts. "Colonel Kowalski," he said as she entered, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please, have a seat. We have a situation that requires your unique capabilities." He gestured toward a chair positioned to give her clear sight lines to the multiple display screens that dominated one wall of the room. As Viper settled into the offered chair, she studied the faces around the table with the tactical awareness that had kept her alive through 17 impossible situations. Intelligence officers, strategic planners, operations specialists, each one representing a different aspect of American military capability. The diversity of expertise suggested a mission that would require coordination across multiple disciplines and theaters of operation. "What you're about to hear is compartmentalized at the highest levels," General Webb continued, his tone making clear that this conversation would not leave the room. 3 days ago, our intelligence networks detected unusual activity among enemy forces across 4 separate theaters of operation. What initially appeared to be routine tactical adjustments has revealed itself to be something far more sophisticated, a coordinated campaign designed to systematically eliminate American air superiority. The words sent a chill through Viper that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Air superiority had been the foundation of American military doctrine for decades, the technological and tactical advantage that allowed smaller forces to achieve decisive victories against numerically superior enemies. If that advantage was under systematic attack, the implications extended far beyond any single theater of operation. "Show her the intelligence summary," General Webb directed, and immediately the wall displays came alive with satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and tactical assessments that painted a picture of an enemy more sophisticated and coordinated than anything they'd previously encountered. Red markers indicated known threats, while blue ones showed American assets that had been systematically targeted and eliminated with disturbing precision. "In the past 72 hours," explained Colonel Janet Morrison, the intelligence briefer whose presentation carried the weight of irrefutable evidence, "we've lost 6 aircraft across 4 theaters, not to lucky shots or tactical errors, but to coordinated ambushes that demonstrated detailed knowledge of our operational patterns and technological capabilities. Each attack was precisely executed, perfectly timed, and designed to maximize both material damage and psychological impact." Viper studied the tactical displays with the focused intensity of a predator evaluating threats to her territory. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Each successful enemy engagement had been preceded by detailed surveillance, careful analysis of American tactics, and the deployment of countermeasures specifically designed to exploit perceived weaknesses in their approach. It was professional work, the kind of systematic campaign that required both sophisticated intelligence capabilities and the organizational structure to coordinate complex operations across vast distances. "They're not just adapting to our tactics," she observed, recognizing the deeper implications of what she was seeing. "They're predicting them. Someone has been studying American air operations with academic thoroughness, identifying patterns and developing specific countermeasures for each one. This isn't improvisation, it's applied strategic planning at the highest level." General Webb nodded approvingly, recognizing the insight that separated exceptional officers from merely competent ones. "Exactly. Which brings us to why you're here. Every pilot we've lost was following established doctrine, executing textbook approaches that have been successful for decades. The enemy has learned to counter our strengths, but they may not have prepared for our broken pieces, pilots whose experiences have forced them to develop unconventional approaches." The logic was both flattering and terrifying. They were asking her to succeed where others had failed, not because she was better than her fallen comrades, but because she was different, scarred, damaged, forced to adapt in ways that standard training couldn't replicate. Her wounds weren't just proof of survival. They were evidence of evolution under pressure, the kind of adaptation that might give her advantages that traditional tactics couldn't provide. "What's the mission?" she asked, cutting through the psychological analysis to focus on the practical reality of what they were asking her to do. The briefing materials suggested a threat that required immediate response, and delay would only give the enemy more time to refine their anti-aircraft capabilities. Colonel Morrison activated another display, this one showing a detailed map of mountainous terrain that looked disturbingly familiar. 48 hours ago, our most advanced reconnaissance satellite went dark over this region. Initial assessment suggested technical malfunction, but subsequent intelligence indicates the satellite was brought down by a directed energy weapon of unknown origin and capability. The technology represents a quantum leap in anti-satellite warfare, and we need to understand how it works before it can be deployed against our entire orbital infrastructure. The implications were staggering. American military doctrine depended heavily on satellite-based intelligence, navigation, and communication systems. If the enemy had developed the capability to systematically eliminate those assets, it would represent a fundamental shift in the balance of power that could affect conflicts worldwide. The mission wasn't just about recovering intelligence. It was about preventing a technological revolution that could render American forces blind and deaf in future conflicts. "The site is heavily defended," General Webb added, his tone making clear that this wouldn't be a routine reconnaissance mission. Our best intelligence suggests a defensive network that makes your yesterday's target look like a training exercise. Multiple overlapping SAM sites, sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities, and what appears to be the prototype directed energy system itself serving as both target and defensive weapon. Viper felt her pulse quicken with the familiar combination of fear and anticipation that preceded the most challenging missions. This was the kind of assignment that defined careers, the opportunity to test her skills against an enemy that had been systematically defeating American air power. The tactical challenge was immense, but so was the potential for proving that adapted warriors could succeed where conventional approaches had failed. Rules of engagement, she inquired, though she suspected that a mission at this classification level would come with broad authorization for whatever action proved necessary. When national security hung in the balance, political considerations usually gave way to military necessity. Weapons-free, full combat authorization, General Webb confirmed. Your primary objective is intelligence gathering. We need to understand how that directed energy system works and how to counter it. Your secondary objective is target destruction. If you can eliminate the facility, it prevents them from using the technology against our satellite network. Tertiary objective is psychological impact. Demonstrate that American air power can reach any target, defeat any defense, eliminate any threat. The mission parameters were exactly what she'd expected: broad authority, multiple objectives, success criteria that extended beyond simple target elimination. This was the kind of assignment that required tactical flexibility, strategic thinking, and the kind of improvisation that could only come from years of experience in situations where survival depended on adapting faster than the enemy could react. Aircraft assignment, she asked, though she suspected they'd already selected the most advanced platform available for a mission this critical. The enemy's demonstrated capability against American aircraft suggested that only their most sophisticated systems would have any chance of penetrating the defensive network and surviving long enough to accomplish the mission objectives. F-35C Lightning II, carrier variant with experimental modifications, Colonel Morrison replied, activating a display that showed the sleek profile of her assigned aircraft. Enhanced stealth coatings, upgraded electronic warfare suite, and classified sensor packages that should give you advantages the enemy hasn't seen before. It's a one-off prototype that's never been deployed operationally. They won't have countermeasures for systems they don't know exist. The aircraft specifications were impressive even by her standards: thrust-to-weight ratios that bordered on the impossible, sensor fusion capabilities that would give her unprecedented situational awareness, and weapons systems that represented the cutting edge of American military technology. But more importantly, it was unknown to the enemy, a variable they couldn't have planned for in their systematic campaign against American air power. Timeline, she inquired, recognizing that missions at this level of sensitivity usually operated under compressed schedules that reflected both operational urgency and the need to prevent intelligence leaks that could compromise mission security. 18 hours, General Webb replied, his tone making clear that this wasn't negotiable. The enemy is actively expanding their defensive network, and our intelligence suggests they're preparing to deploy additional directed energy systems at other locations. Every hour we delay gives them more time to strengthen their position and potentially develop countermeasures for even our most advanced aircraft. 18 hours. Enough time for final mission planning, aircraft preparation, and the mental transition from strategic planning to tactical execution. Viper felt the familiar calm settling over her as her mind shifted into mission mode, human concerns fading in favor of the crystalline focus that had carried her through 17 previous impossible situations. This would be number 18, and possibly the most challenging of all. I'll need complete intelligence files on the target area, detailed analysis of the defensive network, and full technical specifications for the directed energy system, she stated, beginning to build the comprehensive understanding that would be essential for mission success. I'll also need alternative extraction routes and contingency plans for every conceivable failure mode. General Webb smiled, the expression of a commander who recognized that he'd chosen the right person for an impossible job. Everything you need is being prepared now. Colonel Morrison will be your primary intelligence liaison, and she has carte blanche to provide whatever support you require. He paused, his weathered face becoming serious. Colonel Kowalski, I want you to understand something. This mission represents more than just intelligence gathering or target elimination. It's about proving that American military power can still reach anywhere in the world and eliminate any threat. The scars you carry are proof that you've already paid the price for that capability. Now it's time to collect the interest. As the briefing concluded and the assembled officers began to disperse, Viper remained seated for a moment, processing the magnitude of what she'd been asked to accomplish. 18 hours from now, she'd be flying into the most sophisticated defensive network ever deployed against American aircraft, armed with experimental technology and guided by tactical skills honed through years of survival at the edge of possibility. The enemy thought they'd learned how to defeat American air power. They were about to discover that legends were harder to kill than ordinary pilots. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of technical briefings, mission planning, and aircraft preparation that transformed theoretical possibilities into actionable reality. Viper absorbed intelligence reports with the focused intensity of someone whose life would depend on understanding every detail, memorizing defensive positions, studying terrain features, and developing the comprehensive mental model that would guide her through the most challenging mission of her career. The experimental F-35C was a work of art disguised as a weapon of war, its advanced systems integrated with a sophistication that bordered on the supernatural. Every control surface had been optimized for stealth, every sensor calibrated for maximum sensitivity, every weapon system designed to deliver precision death at ranges that would keep her outside most defensive envelopes. It was the kind of aircraft that could only exist at the intersection of unlimited funding and technological desperation. As she ran through final systems checks, Viper felt the familiar transformation beginning, the shift from human to weapon, from individual to force of nature. Her scars stopped aching, her limp disappeared into the fluid grace of purpose, and her damaged heart began to beat with the steady rhythm of a machine built for war. In 6 hours, she would take to the sky and prove that some angels were forged in fire, tempered by loss, and made invincible by the simple refusal to surrender to the impossible.